The massive golden throne room stretched for miles in every direction. Emperor Vexitar sat on his crystal throne, his purple skin gleaming under the artificial suns that lit his palace. Around him, representatives from dozens of alien species knelt on the cold marble floor. Some had fur, others had scales, and a few looked like walking trees. All of them were slaves to the Zephyrian Galactic Empire. "Report," the Emperor commanded, his voice echoing through the vast chamber. General Krath, his chief military advisor, stepped forward. His forearms moved as he spoke. "My lord, we have discovered another primitive species in the Outer Rim. They call themselves humans. They live on a small blue planet they call Earth." The Emperor leaned forward slightly. "Are they useful for labor?" "Very much so, sir. They are strong, clever with tools, and breed quickly. Our scouts report they have over 7 billion individuals on their home world alone." Emperor Vextar smiled, showing his sharp teeth. "Excellent. Send the usual demand for surrender. If they refuse, we will take them by force. How many ships do they have?" "Very few, my lord. Perhaps 200 small vessels. Nothing that could threaten even our patrol fleets." The Emperor waved, his hand dismissively. "Then this will be simple. Proceed with standard protocol." Far across the galaxy, Admiral Kate Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance. She was a tall woman with short brown hair and serious eyes. Around her, the crew worked quietly at their stations. Through the large window in front of her, she could see the stars. "Admiral," called Lieutenant Julia Martin from the communication station. "We're receiving a transmission from Commander Sullivan's diplomatic ship." Kate turned around. "Put it through." The screen flickered, and Commander Jake Sullivan appeared. He was a middle-aged man with gray hair and kind eyes. Behind him, Kate could see the bridge of the UES Liberty. "Admiral Morrison," Jake said, his voice tense. "We've made contact with an alien patrol fleet near Alpha Centauri. They're demanding our immediate surrender." Kate frowned. This was humanity's first contact with alien life, and it was not going as planned. "What exactly did they say?" "They claim we are now subjects of something called the Zephyrian Galactic Empire. They want us to power down our weapons and prepare to be escorted to a processing facility." "Processing facility?" Kate asked. "That's what they called it. When I tried to explain that we come in peace and want to establish diplomatic relations, they laughed. They said all primitive species say the same thing." Kate felt a cold anger growing in her chest. "What's your current situation?" "We're surrounded by 12 of their ships. They're much larger than ours, and their technology seems advanced. But Admiral, there's something else. They keep calling us primitives and talking about work assignments." Before Kate could respond, another voice cut through the communication channel. It was Captain Lisa Brown, calling from the reconnaissance ship UES Explorer. "Admiral Morrison, this is Captain Brown. I'm transmitting emergency footage from the Kepler colony. You need to see this immediately." The screen split, showing both Jake and Lisa. Lisa's face was pale, and her hands were shaking. "Show me," Kate ordered. The image changed to show the human colony on Kepler 442b. Kate had visited this world just 2 years ago. It was a beautiful place with green fields and small towns. Now she watched in horror as huge alien ships hovered over the settlements. Hundreds of humans were being forced into large metal cages. Kate recognized some faces from her previous visit. There was Carl Davis, the settlement administrator, being pushed roughly by a tall alien with gray skin. His wife Maria was crying as they separated her from their young daughter. "They're loading them into cargo ships," Lisa's voice said over the transmission. "Like cattle, Admiral. I've been watching for 3 hours. They're taking everyone." Kate's hands clenched into fists. "How many colonists?" "About 5,000. Men, women, children, all of them." On the other half of the screen, Jake Sullivan was still waiting for orders. Behind him, Kate could see flashing lights, indicating that the alien ships were powering up their weapons. "Commander Sullivan," Kate said carefully, "try to stall them. Tell them we need time to consult with Earth." "I'll try, Admiral, but they don't seem patient." Kate turned to her tactical officer, Commander Steve Adams. "How long until the rest?" Of our fleet can reach Alpha Centauri? 18 hours at maximum speed, Steve replied. And how long to reach the Kepler colony? 36 hours. Kate closed her eyes for a moment. In her mind, she could see those families being torn apart, loaded onto alien ships like cargo. When she opened her eyes again, her expression was cold and hard. Captain Brown, continue monitoring. The situation at Kepler. Record everything. Commander Sullivan, do whatever you can to buy us time. I'm taking the fleet to Alpha Centauri. Admiral, Steve said quietly, we're heavily outnumbered. Intelligence suggests the Zephyrian Empire has thousands of ships. Kate looked at him. Then we'd better be very smart about how we fight them. She turned back to the communication screen. Jake Sullivan was speaking with someone off camera, probably the alien commander. When he turned back to face her, his expression was grim. Admiral, they're giving us 1 hour to surrender completely. After that, they say they'll destroy our ships and take our crews as prisoners. Kate nodded slowly. Understood, Commander. Hold your position. She cut the transmission and turned to address her bridge crew. Every person was looking at her, waiting for orders. These were good people, she thought. They had signed up to explore the stars to represent humanity among the cosmos. None of them had expected to find an empire that treated other species as slaves. Communications, she called to Julia. Get me a priority channel to Earth. I need to speak with President Rodriguez immediately. Yes, Admiral. Kate walked to the large window and stared out at the stars. Somewhere out there, thousands of humans were being enslaved. Somewhere else, Jake Sullivan and his crew were surrounded by hostile aliens who considered them property. For 3,000 years, the Zephyrian Empire had ruled the galaxy. They had conquered 47 different species, turning entire worlds into slave camps and mining operations. To them, humans were just the 48th species to be absorbed into their empire. They had no idea what they had just started. Admiral, Julia called out, I have President Rodriguez on the line. Kate straightened her shoulders and prepared to make the most important report in human history. Behind her, the crew of the UES Defiance waited silently. Through the window, the stars seemed to shine a little brighter, as if they knew that everything was about to change. The age of human innocence in the galaxy was over. What came next would shock the entire empire. The emergency session of the United Earth Council had been going for 6 hours. President Helen Rodriguez sat at the head of the long table, her face grave as she listened to the reports coming in from across the galaxy. Around the table, the most important leaders of humanity argued about what to do next. We cannot go to war with an empire that has ruled the galaxy for 3,000 years, said Secretary of State John Palmer. We have 200 ships. They have thousands. Secretary of Defense Ryan Murphy slammed his hand on the table. They enslaved our people, John. 5,000 colonists from Kepler are being loaded onto cargo ships like animals. What would you have us do? Send them a strongly worded letter? We should try diplomacy first, Palmer insisted. Maybe we can negotiate for the release of our colonists. General Paul Carter, head of Earth Space Command, stood up slowly. He was an old soldier with gray hair and scars on his hands from his younger days. Mr. Palmer, with respect, you don't negotiate with slavers. You fight them. President Rodriguez held up her hand for silence. General Carter, what are our military options? Carter activated a holographic display showing the galaxy. Red dots marked Zephyrian positions while blue dots showed human ships. The red dots outnumbered the blue ones by thousands. On paper, we have no chance, Carter said honestly, but my tactical team has been studying the intelligence we gathered. The Zephyrians have been the dominant power for so long that they've become lazy. They rely on overwhelming force and superior technology, but they've forgotten how to fight a real war. Colonel Nancy Pierce, Carter's chief strategist, stepped forward. She was a small woman with sharp eyes and a quick mind. The Zephyrians expect every species to surrender immediately. In 3,000 years, no one has ever fought back after seeing their fleet strength. This gives us an advantage. What kind of advantage? Rodriguez asked. Surprise, Pierce said simply. They don't know how to fight an enemy that refuses to give up. More importantly, They don't know about our new weapons technology. She activated another display showing technical specifications. Dr. Linda Hayes and her team have been working on quantum disruption technology for the past 5 years. It was designed to defend Earth against asteroid impacts, but we've discovered it can neutralize Zephyrian shield systems. The room fell silent. This was the first time anyone outside the military had heard about the secret weapons program. How effective is it? Rodriguez asked. Dr. Linda Hayes, a brilliant physicist with wild gray hair, stood up from the back of the room. Mr. President, our tests show that quantum disruption can completely disable their defensive systems. Without their shields, their ships are vulnerable to conventional weapons. But we still face overwhelming numbers, Palmer pointed out. Numbers don't matter if we're smart about how we use them, Carter replied. We hit them fast, hard, and, in places they don't expect, we make them afraid. Meanwhile, far across the galaxy, the situation was getting worse. On the enslaved colony of Kepler 442b, Sam Williams crouched behind a pile of rubble, watching Zephyrian guards march another group of human prisoners toward the loading docks. Sam had been the colony's chief engineer before the invasion. Now, he was something else entirely. Alex Turner, the former head of colonial security, crawled up beside him. How many more ships? Sam whispered. 3 more cargo vessels landed this morning, Alex replied. They're loading 1,000 people per ship. Sam clenched his fists. Among the prisoners, he could see Dr. Beth Collins, the colony's medical officer. She was helping carry an injured child, her face determined, despite the hopeless situation. We IOI have to do something, Sam said. With what? Alex asked. They took all our weapons. We have maybe 50 people in the resistance. They have thousands of guards. Then we get creative. That night, Sam's resistance group struck their first blow. Using his engineering knowledge, Sam had rigged the colony's power grid to overload. At exactly midnight, every light in the main detention center went out. In the darkness, Alex Turner and his team moved quickly. They had spent days memorizing the guard positions and patrol routes. Now they used that knowledge to rescue as many prisoners as possible. Dr. Beth Collins was among the first they freed. Sam, she whispered as they helped her escape. I've been listening to the guards talk. They're planning to ship us to the mining worlds in the Zerian system. Once we're there, we'll never see Earth again. Then we make sure that doesn't happen, Sam replied. Back in space, Commander Jake Sullivan was running out of time. The Zephyrian fleet commander, a cruel alien named Korth, had grown tired of waiting for humanity's surrender. Your hour is up. Human, Korth's voice crackled over the communication system. Surrender now, or we will destroy your ships and take your crews as prisoners. Jake looked around his bridge. His crew was scared, but they were also angry. They had heard the reports from the Kepler colony. They knew what surrender meant. This is Commander Sullivan, Jake said into the communicator. I have a message for you from the human race. Speak quickly, Korth replied. Jake took a deep breath. Go to hell. The Zephyrian ships immediately opened fire. The UES Liberty's shields flared as energy beams struck the hull. But Jake's ship was not alone. Admiral Morrison had arrived with the human fleet just in time. 200 human ships dropped out of hyperspace around the surprised Zephyrian patrol fleet. The aliens had expected to be fighting one small diplomatic vessel. Instead, they found themselves facing the entire human military. All ships, Admiral Morrison's voice rang out over the fleet communication system. Weapons free. Show them what happens when you threaten human civilians. The battle was fierce but short. The Zephyrians had better technology, but they were not prepared for the fury of the human attack. When the quantum disruption weapons tore through their shields, their superior numbers meant nothing. Within an hour, the Zephyrian patrol fleet was destroyed. Commander Korth's ship was the last to fall, its hull cracking under the combined fire of 50 human vessels. But Admiral Morrison knew this was only the beginning. The patrol fleet was just a tiny part of the Zephyrian military. Soon the entire empire would know that humanity had fought back. Communications, she called to Lieutenant Julia Martin. Send a message to Earth. Tell President Rodriguez that the line has been drawn. There's no going back now. In the distance, more Zephyrian ships were already approaching. The real war was about to begin. The Zephyrian capital system had never seen anything like it. 5,000 Imperial warships surrounded the homeworld, their massive hulls gleaming in the light of the system's twin suns. It was the largest fleet ever assembled in the Empire's 3,000-year history. Emperor Vextar stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion. The massive vessel was 10 miles long and carried enough firepower to destroy entire planets. Around him, his generals and admirals waited for the human surrender that they knew must come. "Report on the human fleet," the Emperor commanded. General Krath consulted his datapad. 200 ships, my lord. They appeared at the edge of our system 1 hour ago and have been holding position ever since. Admiral Zorith, the Emperor's naval commander, laughed. 200 ships against 5,000. Even for primitives, this seems foolish. But Fleet Commander Korth was not laughing. He had been the only survivor of the patrol fleet that encountered the humans at Alpha Centauri. His ship had been badly damaged and he had barely escaped with his life. "My lord," Korth said carefully, "these humans are not like other species. They have weapons that can penetrate our shields." The Emperor turned to look at him. "Impossible. Our shield technology is thousands of years ahead of anything these primitives could develop." "I saw it myself, my lord. Their weapons cut through our defenses like they were not there." Admiral Zorith waved dismissively. "One lucky hit does not make them a threat. Look at the numbers, Korth. We outnumber them 25 to 1. At that moment, the communication system activated. A human voice, speaking in clear Galactic Standard language, filled the bridge of every ship in the Imperial fleet. "This is Admiral Kate Morrison of the United Earth Space Force. I am speaking to all ships of the Zephyrian Empire and any species under their control." The Emperor leaned forward in his command chair. He was curious to hear what these primitives would say before they surrendered. "I am here to deliver a message from the human species," Admiral Morrison continued. Her voice was calm but filled with a cold anger that made even the Emperor feel uncomfortable. On the bridge of the UES Defiance, Admiral Morrison stood before the main communication array. Around her, the bridge crew worked silently. Commander Steve Adams monitored the tactical display, while Lieutenant Julia Martin maintained the open channel to the entire system. Morrison had spent hours preparing for this moment. Every word had been chosen carefully. This message would be broadcast across the galaxy, and she wanted every species to understand what humanity stood for. "The Zephyrian Empire has enslaved our people," she continued. "They have treated human beings as property to be bought and sold. They have separated families and sent our children to work in mines and factories." In the Zephyrian fleet, confused murmurs spread among the crews. This was not how conquered species were supposed to behave. They were supposed to beg for mercy, not make accusations. "We came to you in peace," Morrison said, her voice growing stronger. "We sent diplomats hoping to establish friendly relations. You murdered our ambassador and enslaved our colonies." Commander Jake Sullivan had indeed been executed by the Zephyrians, as an example to other species. The news had reached Earth just hours before Morrison's fleet departed. "Therefore," Morrison continued, "the human species hereby declares total war against the Zephyrian Galactic Empire and any species that supports their enslavement of sentient beings." The Emperor shot to his feet. "Total war?" he snarled. "These insects dare to threaten the Eternal Empire?" But Morrison was not finished. "We do not seek your territory. We do not want your tribute or your wealth. We have come here for one purpose, only the complete destruction of your empire and the liberation of every enslaved species under your control." Across the galaxy, on 1,000 different worlds, enslaved species stopped their work to listen. The Kthari, with their beautiful feathered wings, looked up from the crystal mines where they had labored for centuries. The Norvani, tall and proud, despite their chains, paused in the factories where they built weapons for their oppressors. On the mining world of Zerion 7, a Kthari female named Zeska translated the human message for her fellow prisoners. "They say they will free us all," she whispered. "Impossible," replied Threll, a Norvani warrior poet whose people had been enslaved for over 1,000 years. No species has ever challenged the Empire. These humans are different, Zeska said, hope creeping into her voice for the first time in decades. Back in the capital system, Emperor Vextar was screaming orders at his fleet commanders. Destroy them. All ships open fire immediately. But Admiral Morrison had one more surprise. As the first Zephyrian energy beams lanced toward the human fleet, she gave a single command to her tactical officer. Commander Adams, activate quantum. Disruption. All ships weapons free. What happened next would be remembered across the galaxy for thousands of years. The human ships, small and seemingly fragile compared to the massive Imperial vessels, suddenly unleashed weapons unlike anything the Zephyrians had ever seen. Beams of pure quantum energy struck the Imperial fleet. Where they hit, the supposedly impenetrable Zephyrian shield simply vanished. The massive warships, designed to intimidate enemies with their size and armor, found themselves naked and vulnerable. Captain Tony Rodriguez, commanding the UES Thunderbolt, watched his targeting display as Zephyrian shield after Zephyrian shield disappeared. It's working, he called out to his crew. Their shields are down across the entire fleet. The human fleet moved with precision and purpose. Captain Lauren Davis led a squadron of destroyers against the Imperial flagship, while Commander Greg Thompson coordinated attacks on the outer defense perimeter. Major Chris Johnson piloted the experimental fighter UES Wasp, dancing between the massive enemy ships and striking at their weapon systems. His enhanced reflexes and human intuition allowed him to outfly the alien pilots with ease. Within 30 minutes, half of the Imperial fleet was destroyed or disabled. Ships that had terrorized the galaxy for millennia were reduced to burning, wreckage floating in space. Emperor Vextar watched in horror as his proud fleet was systematically destroyed. "How is this possible?" he whispered. Fleet Commander Korth, his face pale with shock, could only stare at the tactical display. "My lord, we are losing ships faster than our computers can count them." Admiral Zorith, who had been so confident just an hour before, was frantically trying to organize a retreat. "All ships fall back to the secondary defense line. Repeat, all ships retreat immediately." But Admiral Morrison was not finished with her demonstration. As the surviving Zephyrian ships tried to flee, she opened the communication channel one more time. "People of the galaxy," she said, her voice now heard on every inhabited world. "This is what happens to those who enslave others. The Zephyrian Empire ruled through fear and superior technology. Today that age ends." She paused, letting her words sink in across thousands of worlds where billions of enslaved beings listened in amazement. "To all enslaved species, your liberation has begun. To the Zephyrian Empire, your reign of terror is over. To any species that supports slavery, we are coming for you next." The communication ended, leaving the galaxy in stunned silence. In one battle, a species that most had never heard of had destroyed the most powerful fleet in Imperial history. On Zarian 7, Zessica looked at Threll with tears in her eyes. "They did it," she whispered. "They actually did it." Emperor Vexitar, surrounded by the wreckage of his once mighty fleet, finally understood what he was facing. These were not primitives who would submit to superior force. These were something the galaxy had never seen before, a species that would rather die fighting than live as slaves. For the first time in 3,000 years, the Zephyrian Empire was afraid. The news spread across the galaxy faster than light itself. Within hours of the human victory at the Zephyrian capital, every enslaved world knew that the impossible had happened. The empire that had ruled for 3,000 years had been defeated by a species most had never heard of. On the mining world of Zarion 7, Zeska stood before a crowd of enslaved workers from a dozen different species. Her feathered wings were dirty from years of working in the crystal mines, but her voice was strong and clear. "The humans have kept their promise," she announced. "They destroyed the Imperial fleet at the capital. Now we must do our part." Threll, the Norvani warrior poet, stepped forward. His people had been warriors before their enslavement, and the fire of rebellion was burning in his eyes. What do you propose, little bird? We take control of this world, Zeska replied. The human fleet is coming, but we can help them by securing the mining facilities and freeing the prisoners. An old Grantic slave, his rock-like skin scarred from decades of hard labor, shook his massive head. The guards have energy weapons, we have nothing but mining tools. Then we use what we have, Zeska said firmly. The humans are fighting an entire empire for our freedom. The least we can do is fight for ourselves. Meanwhile, on the liberated colony of Kepler 442b, Sam Williams was coordinating with the human liberation forces that had just arrived. The resistance movement he had built during the occupation was now working alongside professional soldiers to hunt down the remaining Zephyrian forces. Captain Lauren Davis, commanding officer of the UES Vengeance, met with Sam in what had once been the colony's town hall. The building was damaged from the fighting, but it was still standing. How many colonists are still missing? Captain Davis asked. Sam consulted his notes. About 800 were shipped off-world before you arrived. Most went to the Xerian system. The rest are scattered across a dozen mining worlds. We'll get them back, Davis promised. All of them. Dr. Beth Collins, who had become the medical coordinator for the resistance, approached them with a data pad. Captain, we've been treating rescued prisoners from other worlds. The Zephyrians have been using some kind of control drug to keep slaves docile. We need to find the source and destroy it. What kind of drug? Davis asked. Something that suppresses the will to fight or escape. Without it, the enslaved populations will be much more likely to rebel when they see human ships approaching. Admiral Kate Morrison was thinking the same thing as she stood in the war room aboard the UES Defiance. The human fleet had grown to over 800 ships as new vessels arrived from Earth, but the galaxy was huge, and the Empire controlled thousands of worlds. We need to move faster, she told her assembled captains. Every day we delay, more people suffer in slavery. Commander Steve Adams activated the tactical display. We've identified 43 key worlds that serve as regional control centers. If we can take them, we can disrupt Imperial communications and supply lines. Captain Tony Rodriguez raised his hand. Admiral, what about the other enslaved species? Are they ready to fight alongside us? Intelligence reports say yes, Admiral Morrison replied. Resistance movements are forming on hundreds of worlds, but they need weapons and training. Major Chris Johnson, the test pilot who had proven human superiority in single combat, stepped forward. What if we start training programs? Teach them to use captured Zephyrian equipment? Good idea, Morrison agreed. But first, we need to free more worlds and capture more equipment. The human strategy was simple but effective. Instead of trying to hold territory, they moved in fast strike groups, hitting Imperial bases and freeing slaves before the enemy could respond. Each liberated world became a base for training new rebels and building the growing alliance. On the fortress world of Keth Prime, Princess Valara stood in her father's throne room arguing with the remaining Imperial generals. The Emperor had locked himself in his private chambers after the disaster at the capital, leaving his daughter to deal with the military crisis. We should negotiate, she said for the 10th time that day. The humans have made it clear they only want to end slavery. If we free the enslaved populations voluntarily, maybe we can avoid total destruction. General Krath slammed his fist on the table. Negotiate with primitives? Never. The Empire does not bow to inferior species. Admiral Zorith, one of the few high-ranking officers to survive the capital battle, looked tired and defeated. Princess, with respect, I do not think negotiation is possible. The humans have made their position clear. They want our complete surrender. Then maybe we should consider it, Valara said quietly. The room fell silent. No one in the Empire's history had ever suggested surrender to a conquered species. General Krath's face turned purple with rage. You speak treason, Princess. The Emperor would have you executed for such words. The Emperor is hiding in his chambers while the Empire burns, Valara shot back. Someone has to think about the future of our people. But even as the Imperial leadership argued, the human advance continued. Fleet Admiral Morrison had divided her forces into rapid strike groups, each led by experienced commanders who understood the new type of warfare they were fighting. Commander Greg Thompson led the liberation of the Althar system, where 3 million Cathari slaves had been forced to work in chemical plants. His ships arrived just as the local garrison was preparing to execute the slaves rather than let them be freed. "All ships, emergency speed," Thompson ordered. "We have to get there before they start the executions." The battle was fierce, but brief. The Zephyrian garrison, like most Imperial forces, was not prepared for the new human tactics. Within 2 hours, the system was liberated and 3 million Cathari were free. Similar victories were happening across the galaxy. Captain Eddie Johnson liberated the shipyards of Nexus Station, freeing 500,000 Norvani workers and capturing enough ships to arm a dozen rebel fleets. Lieutenant Mary Robinson coordinated the liberation of the agricultural world of Verdania, where enslaved farmers had been producing food for the Imperial military. But the most important victory came when Major Chris Johnson led a daring raid on the pharmaceutical facility that produced the slave control drugs. The facility was hidden in an asteroid field, heavily defended by automated weapon systems. "This is WASP Leader," Johnson reported as he flew his fighter through the maze of asteroids. "I have visual on the target. Beginning attack run." The facility's defenses were impressive, but they were designed to stop large ships, not small, agile fighters piloted by humans with superior reflexes. Johnson's fighter danced between the laser beams, striking critical systems with precision shots. "Target destroyed," he announced as the facility exploded behind him. "No more slave drugs for the Empire." The effect was immediate. Across the galaxy, enslaved populations who had been kept docile by the drugs suddenly found their will to fight returning. Rebellions broke out on dozens of worlds as slaves realized they could resist their captors. On Zerion 7, Zeska led the charge against the guard barracks. Armed with mining equipment and captured weapons, the rebels overwhelmed the surprised Zephyrian forces. Thrall fought beside her, his warrior instincts returning after centuries of suppression. "The mines are ours," Zeska announced as the last guard surrendered. "Send word to the human fleet. Zerion 7 is free." Admiral Morrison received the message with satisfaction. The tide of the war was turning. What had started as an impossible fight against overwhelming odds was becoming a galaxy-wide revolution. "Communications," she called to Lieutenant Julia Martin. "Send word to all human ships. Phase 2 of the liberation is complete. Begin Phase 3. Phase 3 was the final push toward the Imperial capital. The Zephyrian Empire was crumbling, its grip on power weakening with each passing day. Soon Admiral Morrison would have to make the final decision. Would humanity be content with freeing the slaves, or would they demand the complete destruction of the empire that had terrorized the galaxy for 3 millennia? The answer would shock the galaxy even more than everything that had come before. The final assault on the Zephyrian homeworld began at dawn. Admiral Kate Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance, watching as the largest liberation fleet in galactic history moved into position around the Emperor's fortress planet. 1,500 human ships formed the core of the fleet, but they were joined by over 3,000 vessels from the newly freed species. Cathari fast attack ships with their elegant curved hulls flew alongside massive Norvani battlecruisers. Former slave ships that had been converted into weapons of war filled the space around the planet. "Fleet status report," Admiral Morrison called out. Commander Steve Adams checked his displays. "All ships in position, Admiral. The Liberation Alliance is ready to begin the final assault." Morrison nodded. It had taken 2 years of fighting, but they had finally reached this moment. The Zephyrian Empire, which had ruled the galaxy for 3,000 years, was about to fall. "Open a communication channel to the planet," she ordered. "All frequencies." Lieutenant Julia Martin worked at her station. "Channel open, Admiral. You're broadcasting to the entire system." "This is Admiral Kate Morrison of the United Earth Space Force," she began. "I am speaking to Emperor Vexitar and all remaining Imperial forces. You are surrounded. Your fleet is destroyed. Your empire has fallen. Surrender now, and your people will be treated fairly. Continue to resist, and we will take the planet by force." On the surface of the fortress world, Emperor Vextar sat on his crystal throne in the deepest chamber of his palace. The massive structure had been built to withstand any attack, with shields and armor that could resist the most powerful weapons in the galaxy. Around him stood the last of his loyal generals. Most of his military had already surrendered or been destroyed. Only the most fanatical supporters remained. "My lord," Princess Valara said as she entered the throne room, "the human fleet is waiting for your answer. They have given us 1 hour to surrender." Emperor Vextar looked at his daughter with tired eyes. The past 2 years had aged him greatly. His purple skin was pale, and his once proud bearing was bent with defeat. "Surrender," he whispered. "The Eternal Empire does not surrender to primitives." "Father, the Empire is gone," Valara said gently. "Our fleets are destroyed. Our worlds have been liberated. Our people are dying for nothing." General Krath stepped forward, his forearms crossed in defiance. "The Emperor is right. We fight to the last warrior. Better to die with honor than live as slaves to inferior beings." Admiral Vorth, the commander of the palace guard, nodded agreement. "The palace shields can hold for months. Let them come. We will show them the true strength of the Zephyrian military." But Valara had seen the reports from across the galaxy. She knew what the humans could do. "General, they destroyed our capital fleet in 30 minutes. What makes you think palace shields will stop them?" Above the planet, Admiral Morrison was receiving updates from her fleet commanders. Captain Eddie Johnson reported that his squadron had identified all the major shield generators protecting the palace. Captain Lauren Davis had positioned her ships to prevent any escape attempts. "Admiral," called Major Chris Johnson from his fighter squadron, "we've detected massive energy buildups from the palace. It looks like they're preparing some kind of super weapon." Morrison frowned. Intelligence had suggested the Emperor might have a final desperate weapon hidden in his fortress. "All ships, prepare for evasive action. Deploy quantum disruption fields at maximum strength." On the planet's surface, Colonel Tracy Evans was preparing for the ground assault. Her Marine battalion had been reinforced with volunteer soldiers from a dozen freed species. Zeska, the Cathari rebel leader, had brought 2,000 of her best fighters. Threll, the Norvani warrior poet, commanded another 3,000 warriors eager to strike back at their former oppressors. "Remember," Colonel Evans told her assembled forces, "we're here to end this war, not to take revenge. The Emperor and his supporters will be taken prisoner if they surrender. Anyone who lays down their weapons will be treated according to the laws of war." Sergeant Frank Miller, one of Evans' most experienced soldiers, raised his hand. "What if they don't surrender?" "Colonel," Evans' expression hardened. "Then we do what humans do best. We finish the job." The hour passed with no response from the Emperor. Admiral Morrison gave the order to begin the assault. The first targets were the orbital defense platforms surrounding the planet. These massive weapons had once been the terror of the galaxy, capable of destroying entire fleets. But against human quantum disruption technology, they were helpless. Captain Tony Rodriguez led the attack on the primary platform. "All weapons focus fire on the central hub," he ordered. Within minutes, the platform was reduced to debris. Similar attacks destroyed the remaining orbital defenses. With the space around the planet clear, the fleet began bombarding the palace. Shields. The Emperor's superweapon fired once, sending a beam of pure energy toward the human fleet. But the quantum disruption fields absorbed the blast harmlessly, and return fire destroyed the weapon completely. "Palace shields are failing," Commander Adams reported. "We have clear firing solutions on all targets." "Begin planetary assault," Morrison ordered. The ground attack began with Colonel Evans' Marines landing directly on the palace grounds. They were met by the Emperor's elite guard, but the battle was brief. The guards, used to fighting helpless slaves, were no match for trained human soldiers supported by alien warriors seeking justice. Sergeant Miller and his squad were the first to reach the throne room. They found Emperor Vextar still sitting on his crystal throne, with General Krath and Admiral Vorth standing beside him. "Surrender," Miller called out. "You're surrounded." General Krath raised his weapon. "The Empire does not surrender to primitives." The brief firefight ended with both Krath and Vorth dead. Emperor Vextar made no move to resist as the human soldiers approached his throne. "I am Emperor Vexitar," he said with what dignity remained to him. "I demand to be treated according to my rank." "You're a war criminal," Miller replied. "But you'll get a fair trial." Princess Valara entered the throne room with her hands raised. "I wish to negotiate the surrender of all remaining Imperial forces," she announced. Colonel Evans arrived moments later. "Princess, we're prepared to accept the unconditional surrender of all Zephyrian military forces. Your people will be treated fairly, but the Empire is finished." Valara nodded. "I understand. I formally surrender all Imperial forces and accept responsibility for negotiating the transition to a new government." The news of the Emperor's capture spread across the galaxy within hours. On 1,000 worlds, the last Zephyrian garrisons laid down their weapons. The 3,000-year reign of the Galactic Empire was over. Admiral Morrison stood once again before the communication array of her flagship. This time, her message was one of victory. "People of the galaxy," she began, "the war is over. The Zephyrian Empire has fallen. All enslaved species are now free. The age of tyranny has ended." She paused, letting the magnitude of the moment sink in across countless worlds. "Humanity did not come to conquer or to rule. We came to liberate. Today we have kept our promise. Every chain has been broken. Every slave is free. Every world can choose its own destiny." On the liberated colony of Kepler 442b, Carl and Maria Davis stood with their daughter, watching the sunset over their rebuilt town. Sam Williams worked nearby, helping to construct new homes for refugees from across the galaxy. "Was it worth it?" Maria asked her husband. "All the fighting, all the death?" Carl looked at the happy faces of children playing in the streets, both human and alien. "Yes," he said simply. "Freedom is always worth fighting for." Admiral Morrison's final words echoed across the galaxy. "To all who hear this message, remember that freedom is not a gift to be given by others. It is a right to be claimed by all sentient beings. Today the galaxy is free. Tomorrow it will remain free because good people will stand guard against those who would enslave others." The human fleet began its journey home, leaving behind a galaxy transformed. They had come as liberators and they left as legends. The Galactic Empire was gone, replaced by a confederation of free worlds working together in peace. Humanity had shocked the galaxy by declaring total war. They had shocked it even more by winning. But perhaps the greatest shock of all was that they had kept their word. They sought no territory, no tribute, no dominance. They had come only to free the enslaved, and that was exactly what they had done.